back to a real live Green Connection. This is our very first show in a renewed studio in over a year. And between Zoom and doing runs of my older shows, this is the first live one. And we're lucky we've got something sort of timely and a little bit late, but maybe it will fit into what you're trying to do. And that was a Valentine's Day freeze and what it did to all of our plants and trees. And to talk about our trees, I have Jess Givens, and he's with Davy Trees, and he's an arborist. And he's not a tree cutter because I had a tree, two trees that really died, and we'll talk about them later. But looking up on the website, there's a lot of tree cutters that call themselves arborists, but they're not really. So what is the difference between a tree cutter and an arborist?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. Very grateful to be here. The difference between a guy in a trailer and a chainsaw and an arborist is an arborist has to go through a certification process where they have to take a test, identify tree species. I think there's right around 200 to 250 questions. It's broken up into regions, and you, first of all, have to have 3 years of experience in the field, pruning trees and under the tutelage of an arborist. And then from there, you submit an application to take the test, go through the test. It's pretty involved. It goes through tree biology and soil science, species, and kind of the pruning techniques to properly care for trees. And then we have to do continuing education throughout the year, where we look at the new science behind tree biology, new studies that have come out, and basically keep up to date on our knowledge of trees and tree biology.
There aren't too many actual accredited arborists in San Antonio, are there?
To be perfectly honest, I haven't checked in a while. I couldn't answer yes or no, but I know we are a select group and we get accredited through the ISA, which is the International Society of Arboriculture.
And Davy Trees, I looked that up. And incidentally, if you want to know more about what we're talking about later on and read about it, you can find the Davy Tree blogs on your internet. Is Davy Tree a national company or?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, we're a multinational company. We're also in Canada. It's a 142-year-old company. We were founded in 1880.
So it's like a franchise?
It's an employee-owned company now. The employees got together and purchased the company about 42 years ago. Yes. So it's like a small independent tree company with national resources.
Yeah, that's good. Well, the way I met Jess is I was looking for somebody to look at my poor Hong Kong orchid tree. And like I said, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I looked on the internet to see arborists, and I found one that looked like they would do what I wanted. And they came out on Sunday in a jazzy sports car, so obviously business was good. And they looked at my tree, and they said, "Oh no, that just has to come down, and we'll come back tomorrow and chop it down." Or no, it was a week, because everybody was chopping everything down at that time, right after the freeze. So I thought about it, and then I called David Rodriguez and asked him if he knew of somebody. And he gave me a couple of names and couldn't reach them. Then I called Calvin Finch, and he didn't know anybody. And so I called my neighbor, and my neighbor used Davy Trees. So we called Davy Tree, and we got Jess. So my Hong Kong orchid, which it's the most gorgeous tree. It actually originated in Hong Kong, and people that have gone to Hong Kong are totally fascinated with them. My Hong Kong orchid tree, when it's in full bloom, we live in the Lavaca neighborhood, in back of the Hemisphere Park. It's a showpiece. I mean, it is. I've got two of them, and actually, I won them when they used to do the lunch bunch in the Hemisphere Park, and they had a drawing one time, and then a year later another one, and I won the tree both times, and I planted them myself. And so then, right before Valentine's Day, as a Valentine present, the trees started blooming. And oh, I was so happy. And the next day, trees looked like this. Nothing. Oh, that was almost as bad as losing your electricity and having a water pipe break. But I called Davy Trees, and he said it was a month wait because business is so good, but he didn't come in a jazzy sports car. And this is the way the orchid tree looks now. And it's that applies. What I did was I've made a list of trees that I have and some that I don't have, and I know what happens to them, to mine, and now you maybe have the same problem, and Jess is going to solve your problem. So, the Hong Kong orchid, what happens to that now?
So what happened during the freeze, a lot of the upper canopy just wasn't acclimated to 9 degrees for 5 days. A lot of our trees, especially the ones that are kind of on the edge of their tolerance zones or their climate zones, just didn't do very well. They would have withstood a day, maybe 2, but 5 days of sub-freezing temperatures just basically hurt the vascular system. The vascular system on trees is primarily in the bark. It's actually not in, a lot of people think the vascular system is actually inside the wood, but it's all on the outside. So that freeze came at right at the wrong time.
The wrong time.
The wrong time, because everything was starting to, so we had some warm days right before that, and like your orchid tree started to push nutrients and started to form buds and started to flower. So that all of that nutrients and liquid in that vascular system, again, for 5 days, just couldn't take the freezing temperatures. And the vascular system is like a bunch of little straws lining up and down and basically feeding the tree. So all of that moisture in there actually cracked the vascular system, because as that liquid in there expanded, as it froze, it basically broke the vascular system and didn't allow water and nutrients to move up and down the bark. So basically what ends up happening is the upper canopy dies, but we were lucky to have 6 inches of snow. Well, as lucky as you can be.
Snow is good, right?
The snow actually acted as an insulator to help the root system not go below freezing. So that soil layer below the snow actually stayed warm enough to where the roots didn't freeze.
It has nutrients.
And it has nutrients, it has energy in it, it's got water. I mean, especially, like your trees, they've been there for a while. So very, very hardy, stout root system that was protected by that blanket of insulating snow. And then once the top died, that all started pushing new growth. It activates these latent buds that are in the bark, and those start forming the new tree.
If the trees had not been in bloom, would they have died the same way?
It may not have been as bad. There's no true way to tell that.
Yeah.
Just because
we don't want to repeat.
I definitely don't want to repeat. You were saying business is good, but I would much rather be helping beautify trees other than telling people bad news that, hey, the tree that you've cared for and nurtured for the last 15 years didn't make it through the freeze, or it was severely frostbitten or frost damaged, and now large sections of it are dead. I would much rather come and help structure prune a young tree so it's happy and viable long term, or gently start pulling back from roofs or over driveways or sidewalks, and gently do that so the tree doesn't get stressed out and start basically forming a bunch of ephemeral growth. It's that little bitty sucker growth that starts growing on the limbs. If you prune too much off of a tree, you can actually damage them, and they're trying to replace that leaf.
When they come back from the root system, I guess, which is my Hong Kong orchid,
Right.
will they bloom?
They may not bloom the first year or two, so really they're putting all of their, really what they're trying to do, they're trying to continue that process, because leaves are food factories. So they're trying to put out those leaves, regain that energy, because the new growth is actually very energy consumptive. I mean, it's consuming a lot of energy to put all this new woody tissue up, to put the new leaves out. So it's trying to make new energy for future years. So it will turn into a tree if you select kind of I would say the most dominant branch or two that are coming up out of your shrub now, not necessarily the orchid tree, but orchid shrub, but they will eventually bloom again. It's just going to take them a little time to kind of build that energy back up to where they can start.
It looks like a bush now.
Right. And that's very,
Will they
very
keep
typical.
do you keep all those sprouts?
It kind of depends. If you want more of a shrub-like form, you can keep all of them, or if you want to train a few that are strong and kind of growing the best out of all of them, selectively prune off the ones that you don't like that aren't growing in a good direction, and then you're left with a few different branches, and those become your tree over time.
Well, the redbud, which I have, it looked deader than a doornail. But, you know, in a couple of weeks, it bloomed.
A lot of the red buds did fairly well. They may have not been pushing as much nutrients. They may have not started budding just yet. So a lot of them didn't seem to really die back a whole lot. There are some that had some frost damage out on the tips, but for the most part, the main branches stayed viable.
There's 3 branches that are totally dead.
Right.
And the rest, it was really a good bloomer. A pistache tree, it didn't do anything.
As far as damage to the tree? Right, yeah. So, I mean, a little bit more cold tolerant tree, they seem to do fairly well.
Is that a cold climate tree?
It can be, yes. A little bit further north growing, so a little bit warmer, or excuse me, cooler climate. It's able to withstand.
Not like Canada.
Not that far. More north in Texas, I would say. They tended to do fairly well. This pistache is one of my favorite trees. It's got great fall color, the oranges and reds and yellows, that is pretty reliable. So fantastic tree. Does well in our area. It's drought tolerant. Obviously, it's freeze tolerant for the most part. It's a good tree. I like it.
Well, when we first moved, the family that owned most of the 2 streets that are around me planted a pistache tree in front of each house.
Fantastic. Yeah, and so in the fall, they're fantastic.
But it doesn't bloom. It gets the red berries. But
right. They're not really a flowering tree. It's more the leaves that are the kind of the showy part of it. But like I said, they're drought tolerant. They can withstand some abuse as far as not getting rain for a month and a half. And they do quite well in our area.
What about the Hussets?
The Hussets didn't do very well at all.
You see, mine, that's the one that blooms in yellow?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
They're one of the first things to bloom
to
out. Really? Yours is, so a lot of the Hussets that we've seen, particularly northern San Antonio, and even some in southern San Antonio as well, but New Braunfels, Canyon Lake, kind of the Schertz, Cibolo area, a lot of those just didn't make it. And they actually died all the way either back to the trunk or died all the way back to the ground. Some of them are starting to sucker out and form that ephemeral growth, but most of those upper canopy branches on a lot of them further north that I've seen just didn't make it.
Huh.
Yeah.
And mine is just, it hasn't, well, it just isn't time for it. It blooms about 4 times. And it's on the corner. It wasn't protected by anything.
Huh. That's So, and the funny thing is there's microclimates all over the place, even in your own yard, whether it be the aspect that it's facing, north, south, east, west, or if there's a barrier between it, if it's on the southern side of the home and your home is kind of in front of it, blocking some of that cold north wind, that wind, I think, is what did a lot of plants in. It was just constant and cold.
I lucked out on that one.
For sure.
And also, there's a lot of those along the river.
Yes. Yeah.
How did they do? I didn't. I haven't looked down the river.
So it kind of depends on where along the river you are. Like I said, a lot of them didn't do so well, but the root system again didn't die. And we Satcher are very tenacious, I would say. They don't like to be put down for too long. They're going to come back up from the root system.
They'll come back.
Yes, ma'am.
This is the most hated tree, except by me, Chinaberry.
So Chinaberry is considered an invasive species. They do have some beautiful flowers. They do tend to spread quite rapidly. If you've got one, they provide nice shade and things like that.
Well, unbelievable.
Right.
When I first bought, it was a vacant lot. I built this house, and when I first bought it, the China berries that were there were like shrubs.
Mm-hmm.
So I was living in Houston and come back and forth, and I trimmed the shrubs. Well, now they're like 40 feet tall. But do you know what? What caused all of the trees, the roses, many of the shrubs, to just bloom and to grow like crazy after the freeze?
I think a lot of it was kind of that shock response of the freeze and then the rain.
Really?
So the rain, the amount of rain that we've got is, we're above annual rainfall now, 6 months into the year. So at least, and I live in New Braunfels, so we're
yeah. I built a house in New Braunfels and was going to live there, but my husband's from Germany, and he thought he'd like that, but I like it better here.
Gotcha.
Especially where I am.
So yeah, I think the rain actually saved a lot of plants.
New Braunfels was colder, wasn't it?
I think at my house it got down to 7 degrees.
Below or above?
Just 7 degrees, 7.
And
above,
did you have a
above
problem
0.
with the your electricity?
Fortunately, we did not. I think we kind of live on one of the lines to the local hospitals, so I believe we lucked out, and we were calling friends and neighbors and telling them to come on over
Really?
if you need help. We never lost water or power, but we definitely tried to turn as many things off as possible, because knowing the strain on the power grid, we were trying to help out any way that we could.
Yeah, we had. I have gas cooking, and gas hot water,
Perfect.
and gas fireplace, so that kept us going until the pipes broke.
For sure.
Okay, some of the fruit trees, and you looked at what I had. 2 of the what are they, fresh, the ones that are supposed to live through all climates and all kinds of problems. It's a kind of
Is that the persimmon, the Texas persimmon?
it's an orange.
Oh, the satsumas.
Yeah.
So the
What is it?
satsumas.
It's a new. I bought 2 of them.
Right, the Arctic frost and orange frost. So they're a variety of citrus that were developed by Dr. Moy at the San Antonio Botanical Gardens that are supposed to withstand temperatures in the teens. As long as they're established, they've got to be in the ground for about 2 to 3 years and kind of acclimate a little bit. So I also lost 3 satsumas, a Myers lemon, and an avocado. So because of the freeze. The satsumas, they're like a cutie orange, very, very sweet. They don't transport well, so it's basically you pick it off the tree and eat it type citrus. Absolutely fantastic flavor, very sweet, very few seeds, but it's a cross between a tangerine and a mandarin orange. And like I said, they were developed by Dr. Moy specifically for the San Antonio region.
But you told me mine were mine are going to be like sour lemons.
Yes, because most of the citrus is grafted. Citrus doesn't like wet feet, meaning they don't like their roots to be prolonged in wet conditions. And with our heavy clay soils, a lot of times they'll graft a like a Myers lemon or a Eureka lemon or a Satsuma onto what they call a sour rootstock, which is a little bit hardier root system and plant that does very well, but those grafts tend to be a little bit more fragile, at least until they get established. So what they do, they take a bud from your Satsuma, they'll cut the bark, stick the bud into the sour rootstock, they wrap it, the desired tree starts to grow, and then they snip the top of the sour rootstock, and all you're left with is your
How
tree.
can they sell them and call them?
Because technically it is a Satsuma tree or it is a Myers lemon tree. It's just a grafted tree. There's many fruit trees. Almost, I would say a vast majority of the fruit trees are grafted, because a graft is a true clone of like a Honeycrisp apple or a Fuji apple or pears, au jus pears. A lot of the fruit trees are grafted. So because if you took a seed from each individual fruit, through genetic variation and cross-pollination, you won't necessarily get the exact same fruit every time. So a lot of the named fruits like the au jus pear and Satsuma, like the orange frost, Arctic frost, Miho, Seto, those are grafted on so they maintain the exact same fruit as the parent plant. So that's why they graft them, because if you just plant a seed, a lot of times you don't necessarily get the exact same quality of fruit.
Is that applied to all fruit trees and citrus trees?
A vast majority of them nowadays, yes. Most of them are a grafted species. They'll graft them onto a rootstock. So after a hard freeze like this, people might be seeing regrowth starting to come up from the base, but a lot of time that's from, if you look at it very closely, you'll see a line on where that graft is, and it's coming from below that line, and that's actually the sour rootstock. So if it does produce, if it ever does produce fruit, which it eventually will, it'll take it 5 to 7 years, but once it does, the fruit will be almost inedible. It's very sour, very bitter. It just
Why don't they tell you that when you buy them?
To be perfectly honest, I don't know. Most of them are grafted, though, especially citrus, because when you buy that Myers lemon or that Satsuma or the navel orange, it's more than likely grafted onto a sour rootstock.
Yeah, I see. We have a lot of orange trees, look like orange trees, in the neighborhood, and they're lovely.
Right.
But nobody ever picks them, so
They're
I was
probably
wondering why. I guess that's why.
they might be the sour orange rootstock from the freeze back in the 80s. So yeah, like I said, a lot of the citrus did not do well unless it was planted from seed. If it was planted from seed, it'll regrow that same plant that you were enjoying for years before the freeze. So, but anything that you bought at a supermarket or a nursery or anything like that, a lot of those will be grafted onto sour rootstock and are probably not ever going to produce an edible orange or citrus.
And then the others, the normal, the oaks, the elms, pecans.
Most of the oaks did, especially the live oaks, they did fairly well. There is some mortality just because it was so cold for so long. We're seeing a lot of the native live oaks did really well. The hybrid live oaks, they've got a little bit bigger leaf, a little faster growing, didn't do quite as well. And then the red oaks didn't do as well either. Depending on where you're at and where the tree was at, we are seeing some that are only growing from the center trunk and not out on the branches. So they probably didn't make it, unfortunately.
Are the pecans going to be bitter?
That is a wait and see game. Hopefully, with all the rain that we've had, I don't know that they're going to be. They might be a pretty good crop. I know my pecan tree is just loaded with crop right now. So much so that I should probably start reducing some of it, but I have not yet.
Okay, among the Davy blogs, which I looked up, is how to tell if a tree is dead in winter.
So there's a couple of different things you
It
can
says
do.
look for budding life, inspect the tree, perform the scratch test. The scratch test is you use your fingertip or a pocket knife to lightly scratch a spot, and the layer falls off. It should be moist and green.
So you're looking for that green underneath the
And so you
kinda
can
under-
find that on the internet.
Sure.
And will a late spring frost or summer or snowfall hurt a tree?
It can, depending on the species and how
Because it's
heavy
in the
the frost
process
was.
of-
Right. Especially here, we're just not used to snow and sub-freezing temperatures.
And you can find that on the under Davy Trees blog. And can you help trees damaged by frost in 45 seconds?
Yes, just baby them. Water them, look after them, try to nurture them as best you can. Deep root fertilization, and just keeping a close eye, or calling an arborist and having us help do the work for you.
Well, these help me, and you help me more. And when is a good time to start planting now for new?
Fall. Fall is the best time, especially in our region, to plant trees and
So
shrubs.
with all the rain, the soil ought to be pretty good for.
The soil should be very, very nice, and again, fall because it has a chance to establish a root system.
And what
for it.
size is a good size to?
I like smaller trees rather than big trees. They have a chance to establish and grow faster usually than you get the wow factor now with the big tree, but the smaller trees tend to grow better,
Yeah, and they're easier to plant.
and they're easier to plant.
Okay, it's almost time to close the first new Green Connection. Thank you so much for watching. I hope somebody's watching. And I've missed talking to you. I don't miss Zoom. And I hope you've come through the pandemic as well as we have. And I hope your plants have come as well. And I hope to have Davy Trees back because they have a blog where you can look up how you can plant around your trees and really get a better looking yard and not so stark with just grass and a tree just coming up in the middle. It's a part of a landscape, and that is really nice. So have a happy, healthy month, week, day, and see you next time. Stay green.